Hey everybody, it's William Green. These are my green pets. And I'm starting today's program off with some footage I took a couple weeks ago in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And what did I find? Well, a local guide showed me a place where I could find yellow lady slipper orchids. This is Cypripedium parviflorum variety pubescens. And it's the first time that I've ever seen a slipper orchid in the wild. In fact, Cypripediums are pretty widespread across the United States, but this is the first time that I've been able to find them in the wild and in bloom. So a little bit of information about these plants. As you can see, these were in bloom at the beginning of July, but depending on where you live in the United States and the elevation, these slipper orchids could be blooming as early as May or as late as these which are in July. So although this plant is widespread, it grows along, as you can see here, there's a nearby stream. It's on a hillside, so there's constant drainage. It's moist but not soggy, and the roots grow along the surface, just under the surface of the medium. So they're not really deeply rooted. But I did want to talk a minute about the reason these plants are often hard to find is because, generally speaking, people who don't know better, when they find these plants, they want to bring them home. I mean, why wouldn't you? They're beautiful, right? The thing is, when you take plants like this out of the wild, the chances of them surviving in your conditions, even if you're an expert orchid grower, you are really, really, really running a risk of killing the plant. And not to mention, you're reducing the wild population, and a lot of times it's just illegal. I mean, these plants are protected, right? So there are several places out there that you can buy hybridized, garden-friendly slipper orchids, and I would highly suggest you look into, for example, there's a company called Raising Rarities in Ohio. There's another one called Post Hill Gardens. And they both offer beautiful hybrids of these Cypripediums that will happily grow in your garden, so you don't have to even be tempted by these wild growing plants. All right, well, let's get a little geeky right now and dig in the dirt. You can see the first 2 or 3 centimeters of the soil is just this decomposing mixture of leaves and pine needles. And then as I start to kind of poke into the dirt with my fingers, you see that it's still quite loose. It's very moist. As you saw earlier, it's kind of next to that stream, but it's a very loose, kind of almost sandy soil, so that the roots can freely navigate. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that little segment. Let's go back to the greenhouse and check in on my green pets, which are my orchids. This is my orchid collection that I've had for, I guess, about 5 years now. 2014 is when I started collecting this particular collection. And let's start out with this one. This is Bulbophyllum echinolabium, and it was having some issues. It put out a new growth that was kind of runty and weird. But then the second growth that it put out here, the leaf has come out beautifully, just perfect. And what I discovered was that water was getting in that sheath as the growth was growing, and it was causing the leaves to deform. So I put a little plastic sheath over the growing leaf, and it came out perfectly. Now the clonal name for this plant is Hal, because I thought that the red center of the flower reminded me of that evil computer from 2001: A Space Odyssey. And the flowers are just so nice because once the plant puts out a spike, it blooms just about every 2 weeks for several months. And the flowers only last a couple days, and they don't smell very good, but they are really spectacular. So I have a special place in my heart for Hal. Now this is kind of a different plant. This was given to me as a Malaxis latifolia, but it actually has a different name. I took it to Orchid Judging a few weeks ago, and they actually gave it a different name, which I'll show you at the bottom of the screen. I don't actually remember it right now, but I'll be able to pull up the caption later. But the cool thing about this one is that it puts out these little babies, and you can see here's one just kind of fits in the palm of my hand. And it's very prolific. It puts out, the pseudobulb will put out the main growth, and then kind of later in the season it starts putting off additional growths as well. So it's kind of a fun one to have, and a really easy grower, and blooms reliably every spring. Let's look at one of my slipper orchids. This is Parviflorum callosum. This is a first bloom seedling. I love the green towards the center. I love the red or the kind of magenta and white striping at the top. And then next to it is a Parviflorum tonsum. And tonsum actually means bald, meaning like no hairs. A lot of these slipper orchids are kind of hairy. And so this one is unusual because it's a bald variety, but it's got nice little spots, kind of a nice greenish yellowish color, and big flowers for such a small plant. All right, it's kind of the centerpiece of my collection right now is this Vanda falcata. It's got 2 spikes in full bloom. These spikes came absolutely out of nowhere. I literally left for a couple of weeks, and like when I came back, this thing was in bloom. So it's really wonderful. These things are native to Japan, and the most flowers I've ever had on it before was, I think, 6. I had 6 last year, and this year it's got 15, so I'm super happy about that. It's put on lots of new growths in the past year. I can attribute that to the excellent growing conditions that are found at the greenhouses at Fantasy Orchids in Louisville, Colorado, which is where I keep these plants. And they have fertilizer, and I think they have some growing hormones as well in their water. So all of my plants have put on lots of extra growth in the past year. But just aren't these lovely? And not only are they pretty, they put out this wonderful fragrance. It's very kind of weak during the day, but once night comes on, it's very strong, very nice, lovely. Okay, let's do a Cattleya update. The Cattleyas are these orchids that I think their common name are cigar orchids because their pseudobulbs look like these long, skinny cigars. But anyway, this first one is Mormodia jumbo world. These are potted in tightly packed sphagnum with bark and perlite at the bottom. You can see it's got pretty decent root growth. The growth seems to be doing okay. It doesn't have a lot of leaves on it, but overall, I think it looks okay. I was hoping for some bigger growth, but, well, it's all right. The next one is this one. It's actually an unnamed hybrid. It's a Fred Clarkara hybrid, and it's also got some pretty decent root growth, although if you look closely at some of the roots, they actually are kind of turning brown there, and I have absolutely no idea why that happens, but it seems to be happening in that transition point between the sphagnum and the bark. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe water's sitting there. Now this one is the best looking one that I have so far. This is a Cattleya Fong Sing, and its roots are going crazy. Now these are all potted in the same way, tightly packed sphagnum with a layer of bark and perlite at the bottom. But the roots on this one look great. It's got far more roots than any of the other ones. The leaves are nice and big and thick. The growth is good and upright, and it just looks the best. So even though they're all receiving the same conditions, that one seems to be doing the best. Now this one's the furthest along. It actually started growing quite a bit before the others. This is the Cycnodes Wine Delight, pretty common hybrid. And I don't see a whole lot of roots in there. I mean, there are roots, certainly, but when you compare it to that Fong Sing we just looked at, it doesn't really have that many. I did not remove last year's old roots, so you can see they're kind of in there decomposing, so I don't know if that has something to do with it. But if you look at the top growth, there's lots of leaves coming off. It is probably the biggest that it's been since I've had it, so that's a good sign. So we'll be looking for flowers on those later in the season. Just a quick update. This is Phalaenopsis schilleriana, and it's putting out some new roots and new leaves. Very happy about that. This is one of my new bulbophyllums. This is Graveolens, and it's putting out a new leaf. Also happy about that. And then finally for the bulbophyllums, this is Antoniferum. And this one was really struggling. The new growths on it were dying off, and I attributed it to some kind of fungus that was growing along the surface there. I was spraying it with hydrogen peroxide for about a month, and then as summer has gone on and the drier conditions have kicked in, it's got 3 new growths on it and putting out new roots, so it looks like it's going to be doing okay. All right, I'm super excited about showing you the next part. Let's look at the Cattleya rex seedlings that I've been growing since they were tiny little babies 5 years ago. Guys, this is the first year that I think we're actually going to get some flowers. If I don't screw it up, and believe me, that is a strict possibility. Some of the younger plants are showing sheaths in their new growths, even though they're not very big, they might not bloom. This is a plant that put out a false sheath last year that's got a really nice, big, healthy sheath on it this year. Looks very, very likely that it's going to have some flowers. This is one of the mounted ones, and it's got 2 new growths on it, but this one growth, it's really kind of confusing me because it looks like it's almost going to have 2 leaves coming out, and these are supposed to be unifoliate plants. They're not supposed to have 2 leaves per growth, so we'll see. That'll be interesting to see what that turns into. Fingers crossed that one is also going to have at least some flowers on it. But here's where all my hopes are really resting right now on this guy. The sheath, if you look inside of it, there is something emerging from that sheath. I'm hoping that they are flower buds. Now, I'll tell you, I made a huge mistake with this plant. I was really concerned. I was having issues with snails eating the root tips, so I took it out of its pot and mounted it for about 3 weeks, and then it got really, really dry, and the leaves kind of wrinkled up, so hopefully I didn't screw it up, and it will still go ahead and bloom, but if not, serves me right. We'll have to wait another year. Alright guys, that is the complete update for today. I'm so glad you stopped by and are interested in checking out My Green Pets. I hope that you enjoyed, and we will see you next time right here on My Green Pets. I'm William Green. Have a great week. See ya.